kwa ukombozi wetu. Tujitoe wenyewe, tusimame pamoja kulinda uhuru na umoja wetu. Enyi bwana na binti wa Afrika, mwili wa jua, mwili wa anga, tuifanye Afrika mti wa uzima. Tuungane sote, tuimbe pamoja, kuenzi shikamano hatima yetu. Tujitoe wenyewe kupambana pamoja, uhuru na umoja vitawale. Enyi bwana na binti wa Afrika, mwili wa jua, mwili wa anga, tuifanye Afrika mti wa uzima. Tuungane sote na tujibidishe kutoa kilicho bora kwa Afrika. Chimbuko la wanadamu, chemchemi ya utamaduni, tumaini letu wakati wa mafarakano. Enyi bwana na binti wa Afrika, mwili wa jua, mwili wa anga, tuifanye Afrika mti wa uzima.
Let us talk about one of the most rich countries in the world, but also one of the poorest. It is very interesting about Africa. Africa has very rich countries, but with very poor people. Now, I'm going to tell you about Equitorial Guinea, very interesting country. You can think about a country with less than 2 million people. I'm being very conservative here. A country with less than 2 million people. A country with a wealth of over 450 billion US dollars. The wealth is over 450 billion US dollars. It has about 1,600,000 people. It's a very small country, the third richest country in terms of oil production. But I tell you, this country has poor people. Even when economists say it has the highest GNI, gross national index, per capita in Africa, the highest GNI, it has the highest GDP, gross domestic product, some of the highest in Africa. GNI in Africa is the highest, GDP some of the highest in Africa. It is the so-called, among the so-called upper middle income, with only 1.6 million people. It has oil, it has timber, it has a fish, it has so much wealth. But this country, named Equatorial Guinea, has had only 2 presidents since its independence. The first president, Nguema, was killed by the current president. And the first president was the uncle of the current president. So one family has ruled Equatorial Guinea since independence. Now this message goes to people in Uganda, that it is possible to have one family rule you for over 50 years. Nguema Tedro has been in power since 1979. How many years today? Those are almost 45 years, almost 45 years. One man in power, one man who took over his uncle, later on killed his uncle to become a president. Today is the leader. And this one man has a family rule. His son is the vice president. His son is the vice president. The country is too rich, but the people are too poor. But the economists will tell you this country has a very good GNI, growth national index. They don't tell you how do you calculate GNI. They don't tell you how do you calculate gross national index. Does it reflect people's income? No. They will tell you this country has a very beautiful GDP. They don't tell you how to calculate a GDP. My name is Katom Mukasa, and of course, I'm an economist by training and of course a lawyer. And this is Humanist TV Africa. It's an NGO where we always talk about issues that people don't talk about so that we can sharpen the thinking of our people. Why is Africa so rich, but also so poor? Here is the case today we are handling, the case of Equitorial Guinea. You have all the wealth in the world, all the wealth in the world, but you have people who are poor in Equatorial Guinea when you are not even 2 million people. But because of selfish leaders of Africa, and that has been my message, leaders of Africa are the problems of Africa. No one else. It is the leadership in Africa. Let us look at Equatorial Guinea today. Look at the map and the statistics right here. This is Equatorial Guinea, a country with less than 2 million people, one of the richest countries in the world, with over 450 billion US dollars in terms of income. But this country has many poor people. Let us look at it. Equatorial Guinea is a Central African country comprising of real money, mainland, and 5 volcanic offshore islands. The capital is Marabo. Marabo is found on Bioko Island and has Spanish colonial architecture and is a hub for the country's prosperous oil industry. Its arena, Bianca Beach, drawn dry season butterflies, one of the best. And of course, this country has some of the best tropical forests of the mainlands. It's a beautiful country, I should tell you. It also has Monte Arena National Park. It's the home of gorillas, chimpanzees, and elephants. This country has almost everything good in the world. It has wildlife, gorillas, chimpanzees. It has almost everything good you think about in the world. But this country has poor people, very poor people. The capital of this country is called Marabo. The official language is Spanish, French, Portuguese. This country is in Africa and is, of course, in Central Africa. It uses the Central African CFA currency. It was occupied by the French. Let us look at the history of this country. Now, look at this map here. This country is bordered by Cameroon and, of course, Gabon. This country is called Equatorial Guinea, Mbini, right there, not far away from the Gulf of Guinea. Not far away from the Gulf of Guinea. Marabo is the capital state. And of course, you can see not far away from the Gulf of Guinea. Marabo is the capital state there, Biako, Risha, and the others. A country with less than 2 million people. A country with a wealth of over 450 US billion dollars, with less than 2 million people. But this country has poor people. This country has bad roads. This country is laughable. Africa is a laughable place. When you talk about countries like Equatorial Guinea, with so much wealth, but with so many poor people, you laugh about it and say, Africa, leadership is the problem. Now look at this country here. I'm talking about Marabo. I'm talking about Bato, and Laba. These are the main cities of Equatorial Guinea. Remember the Gulf of Guinea? Yes, the Gulf of Guinea right there. And of course, we are talking about Equatorial Guinea, Luba, Bioko, Marabo. These are the main areas of Equatorial Guinea. I told you, Equatorial Guinea is a small country, very small, very small country, very small. Of course, it comes number 1 in terms of GDP per capita. Number 1 in terms of GDP per capita in Africa of about $34,865 GDP. The size is only about 10,000 830 square miles. Very small country like this. Very small country like this. But this country has been very much poorly mismanaged. US dollars 45 billion in oil revenues since 2000. It earns $45 billion every year in oil revenues since 2000. This country is rich, but this country has poor people. This country has poor roads. This country has poor hospitals. This country has poor schools. With all the riches it has, I want to show you how selfish African leaders are. I want to use this show to show you how selfish, how corrupt leaders in Africa are. And this has been my argument. The capital state is called Malabo. And Luba, one of the main areas there, Pico, Basel, Isla de Bioko. These are the main. Remember, this country is on a gulf, and it's an island, and it has others that actually surround it. Now you can see Equatorial Guinea is the one we're talking about today. A country with a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful environment. A country well endowed, the smallest African country, a member of the United Nations. This country has a gross national income of 19.6 billion. Gross national income of 19.6 billion by 2021. That's power purchasing parity, 19.6 billion. The GNI in 2022 was 1,339 US dollars. GNI per capita. This country is rich on paper. On paper, they'll tell you this country is very rich. The GDP was high at 12,000 billion by 2019. GDP, 12,000 billion by 2019. And it was 28 by 2022 billion US dollars. This country is very rich. The country has petroleum. One of the largest producers of petrol in the world is Equatorial Guinea. They don't even talk about it. Equatorial Guinea, one of the highest, biggest oil producers in the world is Equatorial Guinea. Very rich country with too poor people, very poor people. On paper, they will tell you GDP is high. Why? Because GDP does not mean people having money. GNI does not mean people having money. GNI can be big because there's so much income coming in the country. But the question always I ask is, who owns the income? Who owns the income? Yes, they have all these monies coming in from petrol, from timber, from fish. The question I've been asking in Africa is, who owns the resources? Yes, GDP is high. Yes, GNI is high. But the question I've been asking for Africa is, who owns these resources? Look at population here. It was 1.6 million people in 2022. It was 1.6 million people in 2022. And population growth rate is 2.4. Age dependence, you can imagine age dependence in Equatorial Guinea is 71% to the working class. Now look at the dependence. You can imagine people who are working in Equatorial Guinea, they are having a dependence of at 71%. People begging people for survival in Equatorial Guinea. Urban population 74%. Infant mortality. Look at infant mortality in this country. 57 per 1,000 live births. I want you to go and check infant mortality rate in Singapore. Go and check infant mortality rate in China. Go and check infant mortality rate in UK. And then come and check infant mortality rate in Equatorial Guinea. But also compare their wealth. I want to show you something about African countries, corruption, bad leadership. Look at how many young people are dying in Equatorial Guinea, but also compare the resources they have. Compare the riches they have. And look at how many young people are dying per 1,000 live births. 57. And that was by 2021. It has become worse. Life expectancy in Equatorial Guinea is always 60 years. Always 60 years. One family is the ruler here. one family has been ruling this country since independence. This country is called Equatorial Guinea. Now, in terms of age, the majority of people here are between 15 to 64 in terms of age, and that is 58%. In terms of the second one, biggest are young ones between 0 to 14 years. That is 38%. Those who are old, above 65, are only 3%. Why? People are dying in Equatorial Guinea. Death rate is high. The country is too rich. Population is too small, but people are too poor. Now, look at electricity here. This country has electricity, I should tell you. The country has electricity. It produces its own electricity. They have oil, the third largest producer of oil, but also they have electricity. They have electricity right there. They have little consumption. They don't even export it. They don't even import it. You can imagine, they don't even spend on electricity. But you won't be surprised to go to Equatorial Guinea and find houses in darkness. It shows you how selfish African politicians are. Now look at oil. Look at oil production. Thousands of barrels production. 142 thousands of barrels produced in Equatorial Guinea. Consumption of their oil is only 5,000. And look at refined oil, 290,000. Imports, they don't import oil. Exports, they export oil, including crude oil. They have one family ruling them since independence. One family ruling them since independence. Now, this is the Equatorial Guinea. It shows you what Africa is in a summary. Now, in terms of natural gas, this country has natural gas. This country has natural gas. Look at how much gas they have. In terms of billions, 296 in terms of billions of the natural gas they have. Consumption of the gas is too low because they are too few. They only consume 52 billion in terms of gas, and they export the rest. They don't import gas. The question is, why are people in Equatorial Guinea poor? Why? Corruption. Resources are not evenly distributed. Equatorial Guinea is the pure example of African countries that are too rich but too corrupt, that people remain poor regardless of the countries being too rich. This country has only 7 airports. It's a small country, very small country. It has 7 airports. Cellular phones, people with phones, cellular phones are only 59,000. People with phones are only 59,000. But remember, the people about 1.6 million people. Highways cover only 2,880 kilometers only. Internet users are quite many at 1.2 million. That was by 2016. Telephones, landlines, and all that, only 10,000 there. I'm showing you this to show you the predicament of Africa. I use this to show you the predicament of Africa, and I'm going to produce a book where I'm going to put all this information. I'm doing research for my next book to show you how Africa is rotten. Why Africa is rich, but Africa remains poor. You look at these statistics and wonder, why should a country be so rich, but also be too poor? Look at the total land area of Equatorial Guinea. It's a small country. Location, Western Africa, bordering the Bight of Biafra between Cameroon and Gabon. Some people are going to put it in Central Africa, but here they are putting it in Western Africa. Total area is 28,000 square kilometers. Land area is 28. The same land area, the same total area. Water area is 0. Coastline, the coastline is 296 kilometers. Climate is tropical, always hot and humid. The terrain is coastal plain rising to the interior hills. It's a beautiful country. The lowest point here is called Atlantic Ocean, and the highest point is called Pico Basile. The source of my information is always World Bank. The source of my information is always World Bank and CIA World Fact Book. And of course, the US Embassy. I tell you, this country is too rich. These are the minerals found in Equatorial Guinea. Minerals found in Equatorial Guinea. It has precious metals, precious minerals, Everything you talk about can be found in Equatorial Guinea. I told you this is one of the richest countries in the world. All these minerals, you can imagine, all those minerals are found in Equatorial Guinea. It has minerals, it has precious stones, it has diamonds, it has some bit of gold, and of course it has oil. This country is rich. This country is rich. It has gas, it has natural timber, it has natural gas, it has coke, it has fish. Yet it also has minerals. Now, these houses you've seen, these are the houses of the rich people in Equatorial Guinea. The first son, the first daughter, the nephews, the uncles, the relatives are very wealthy. And of course, the politicians. But when I show you photos of the villages of Equatorial Guinea, you will begin wondering why Africa remains this. This is Equatorial Guinea. Let me show you a bit of the photos right there. These are the palaces of the rich, of the politicians, of the elites. I should tell you that human rights violations in Equatorial Guinea is at the worst. People are in prison. You can see how beautiful buildings are for the rich. People are in prison. People are being kidnapped now and again. The prisons are full of people. Opposition that is meaningful is in prison, including the opposition leader, Moto, has been in exile for a long time. You can imagine a country, they pretend to have political parties, but they are all muzzled. They are either bought by the first president and the son, or they are questioned by the first family. They show you they have opposition. When they go to elections, every time Nguema gets over 90% in every vote, everything is under corruption. But this country is very rich. This country is very beautiful. I should be talking about the bad thing about this country is the leadership. But this country is beautiful. This country is beautiful. Remember, I told you that the official languages are Spanish, French, and Portuguese. This country was colonized by the Spaniards. It's the only country in Africa to have Spain as its official language. The capital city is called Marobo. The capital city is called Marobo City. This is the only country in Africa where Spanish is spoken as the official language. The only country in Africa where Spanish is spoken as the official language. The politicians in this country do deals with Spain. In fact, many of their exports go to Spain. This country here was ruled by Spain. Spanish is the official language. It's the only country in Africa where Spanish is the official language. It was ruled by Spain. The British also ruled it for some time, Portuguese, but of course, it became officially a Spanish colonial empire. It gained its independence from Spain on 12th October 1968. The first president was a man called Francisco Macias Nguema. Francisco Macias Nguema was the first president. These people are poor. Look at them. Look at the children of Equatorial Guinea. They are not even 2 million people, but look at the people, how poor they are. The first president was a man called Francisco Macias Nguema, or known as Macias Nguema Biogo Masi. He was elected in 1971. He assumed world political powers, and he declared himself a president for life. They have all these beautiful animals. Nguema, the first president, declared himself a president for life in July 1972. He became a dictator, the first president. In 1973, a full island was named after him. It was Macias Nguema Biogo Island, named after him. He controlled the radios, he controlled the press, he was a dictator. He ruled then as a dictator until when his own nephew led a coup. The nephew was a soldier, led a coup, and he removed him from power. He removed him from power. His own nephew removed him from power. This is how the second president came to power. He removed his own uncle from power, and then he became the leader. He became the leader through a coup, and that year was 1970. This man here, Teodoro Obiangu Nguema Mbasogo, came through a coup by removing his uncle from the office of the presidency. The year was 1979. He later killed his own uncle to become a president. Today, he has been a president of this country since 1979. Having killed his uncle, he became a president. His son is the vice president. Nguema Tebiang Obiang Mbasogo. He is the Supreme Military Council leader. He was a military council leader. His son, very interesting, his son is also the vice president of this country. This man changed the constitution and made his son. You can see his son. His son is 55 years old. He is a superstar. He's the vice president. He's always going to Europe and all these other countries. Many of his assets have been confiscated in Europe, in so many countries. He's the vice president. He was put there illegally. This man was born on 25th June 1968. He's the son of the president of Equitorial Guinea. He's the vice president. His father even tampered with the constitution, put his son there as vice president. And the constitution says when Nguema dies, the son takes over. You can imagine this is Africa. This is not a movie. This is Africa. The constitution of Equatorial Guinea says when a father dies, who is the president, the vice president takes over. Here is the father decorating his son. His son is the most ravished person in Africa that we know today. He owns yachts all over the world. He owns apartments and buildings. He owns vehicles from son to father, from father to son. This is Africa, a poor country where people don't have money, but a very rich country. The son has so many cars in much of European capitals and is there enjoying life. At the same time, he is the vice president of his father. He's enjoying all this wealth, but in Equatorial Guinea, roads are bad, schools are bad, hospitals are bad, but this country earns over 45 billion US dollars per year from oil. 45 billion US dollars per year from oil. This is the first son's yacht, super yacht, a very expensive boat. The son is always having women and parties and enjoying life. That is the son, and is the vice president of Equatorial Guinea. And this is the problem with Africa. Country too rich, country too corrupt. Moto, the opposition leader of Equatorial Guinea, has been in exile. And then we say he's participating in politics. How do you participate in politics when you're in exile? Then he comes in the country, there is an election. After an election, he goes back to exile. All other credible opposition members in Equatorial Guinea are in prison or dead. The president has been changing the constitution ever since he went to power. Today, they have a 7-year term. It was 5, they kept on changing it. Now, the constitution says term limits, 2 term limits, but they don't even respect it. The constitution in Equatorial Guinea removed term limits, removed age limit. Then they put term limit, just like Uganda. I wanted to use this example to show people in Uganda that here is a good example for you. The country is called Equatorial Guinea. One president, one family since independence. They have term limits in courts. They removed age limit. The constitution is manipulated by the president. In fact, some of the first parliament, when this man went to power, people went through unopposed because whoever stood to oppose was killed or imprisoned. So one family rules. The first lady is also known as the Queen of Equatorial Guinea. The wife of Nguema is also known as the Queen of Equatorial Guinea. The first daughter is untouchable, also very wealthy. So one family controls 45 billion US dollars that come through oil each year. And people in Equatorial Guinea don't have good schools, don't have hospitals, don't have good roads, and their death rate is high. And then we say foreigners are bad, they are destabilizing Africa. When a country like Equatorial Guinea has one family that controls everything, but still people will say, our problem in Africa is not us, it is the foreigners. But one family has been manipulating this country. It manipulates its elections. It manipulates its parliament. It manipulates everything. The prisons are full to capacity in Equatorial Guinea. People are being shot and kidnapped in Equatorial Guinea. There are no freedoms. Yet they will tell you that elections in Equatorial Guinea are free and fair because the president gets over 90% every election. And their constitution says if he dies, the vice president, who is his son, takes over. Now, where is the difference between a monarchy and this country being governed by one family from independence? From 1968, one family has ruled this country. This country has less than 2 million people. This country earns 45 billion US dollars through oil alone each year, with only 1.6 million people. But this country is poor. It is Africa. We are here to tell you what is wrong with Africa and what is good with Africa. My message has been clear in this talk shows about country profile. I was showing you how leadership is an issue in Africa. You can have all the resources in the world, like Equatorial Guinea has. You can even have the smallest population in the world, like Equatorial Guinea has, the smallest population in the world. But once we have greedy leadership, like the one in Equatorial Guinea, trust me, people will remain poor. I've given you evidence to show you why Africa remains poor. Thanks so much for watching. Please share, like, comment on this video. See you in the next show.